This is the one of the example we have seen in our motivation of small talk MVC model view controller. So, our next template is applicability. Coming to the applicability of our observer. So, we can apply based on this, we can apply this pattern on some of the situation. What are the situations that to apply these observer patterns are? The abstraction has two aspects with one dependent on another. That means when an abstraction has two aspects, one dependent on the other, means encapsulating these aspects in separate objects need to vary and reuse them independently. And the next applicability is the subject object doesn't know exactly how many observer objects that it has. That means when it changes to one object requires changing other, and you don't know how many objects you needed to be changed. In such a situation also we are going to use this observer pattern. And our next and the last applicability is subject object should be able to notify its observer objects without knowing who these observed objects are. That means the objects need to be decoupled. That means when an object should be able to notify other objects without making assumption about who these objects are, and to say in other words, you don't want these objects tightly coupled. These are the three situations where we can apply this observer pattern. So, this is about applicability. And our next template is structure. Coming to the structure of this memento pattern is, this is the structure of memento pattern. Here we see the object of components of subject and observer, where we have spoken about an example of flip chord. This is subject will become as a flip chord, and these observer will become as the persons who are searching for the products. Here what these classes do is, here subjects notes its observer, and any number of observer objects may observe a subject, and it provides an interface for attaching and deattaching observer's object. That is a task or work done by this observer. And coming to the observer, this observer defines an updating interface for objects that should be notify of changes in a subject. So, and the next one is, and the next class is concrete subject. Concrete subject, it stores a state of interest to concrete observer objects, and it sends a notification to its observer when it changes a state. So, this is the task done by the concrete subject. And coming to the concrete observer, and it will maintains a reference to a concrete subject object, and it stores state that should stay consistent with the subject, and also it implements the observer updating interfaces to keep its state consistent with the subject. This is the work done by this concrete subject. So, this is the structure for the observer pattern. Based on this structure, we can say how many participants are there here? Those are the 4 participants. The first one is subject, and the next one is observer, and the next one is concrete subject, and the final one is concrete observer. Those 4 are the participants, those who are participating in the structure of an observer pattern. So, this is the structure and participants of an observer pattern. Let us see our next template, collaboration. So, this is about a collaboration template of an observer pattern. Here we consider 3 objects, a concrete subject, and the next component is a concrete observer, and another one is another concrete observer. Here this concrete subject notifies its observers when a change occur that could make its observer state inconsistent with its own. And after being informed of a change in the concrete subject, a concrete observer object may query the subject for information, and the concrete observer uses this information to reconcile its state with of its the subject. In here we have to note that how the observer object that initiates the change request postpones its update until it gets a notification from the subject. Notify is not always called by the subject. It can be called by an observer or by another kind of object entirely. The implementation section discuss some of the variations. You can see this, we can observe this structure and you can find out some of the common variations. And our next template is coming to our next template is consequences. Consequences of this observer pattern is, the first one is abstract coupling between subject and observer. That means all a subject knows is that it has a list of observers, each conforming to that simple interface of the abstract observer class, and the subject does not know the concrete class of any observer. Thus, the coupling between the subject and observer is abstract and minimal. That means they consist of they are not a tightly coupled. This is one of the advantage, and the next one is it supports for broadcasting. That means unlike an ordinary request, the notifications that a subject sends need not specify its receiver. The notification is broadcast automatically to all interested objects that subscribes to it, and the subject does not care how many interested objects exist. Its only responsibility is to notify its observer, that is it. So, it sends a notification. And our next one is dynamic relationship between subject and observer, and unexpected updates, because, and the next one is unexpected objects, because observer has no knowledge of each other's presence. They can be blind to the unlimited cost of changing the changing the subjects. This is the one of the consequences we can say under this observer pattern. These are the consequences we can speak under this observer pattern. And let us see the another template of this observer pattern. Coming to the implementation issues of this observer pattern, we have many number of implementations issues for this observer pattern, and in that some of the implementation issues are, the first one is mapping subjects to their observers. That means the simplest way for a subject to keep track of these observers it should notify is to store reference to them explicitly in the subject. And the next one is observing more than one subject. That means it might make sense in some situations for an observer to depend on more than one subject. And we have seen this an example for these issue is a spreadsheet example or a small tech MVC model view controller example for this. We can say one of the example for this observer more than one subject issue. And the next one is who triggers the update. That means the object and its observer rely on the notification mechanism to stay consistently, but what objects actually calls notify to trigger the update. That means we will speak about the exceptions raised. That means observer, what the observer does and how the notification will set, and how many observer will receive this notification. In such type of triggers, such type of exceptions will be raised. This is the one of the this is the one of the implementation issue we can say under this observer pattern. And the next one is dangling reference to deleted subjects. That means we can say about this delegations, and coming to this delegating a subject should not produce dangling references in its observer, and one way to avoid dangling references is to make the subject notify its observers as it is deleted, so that they can reset their reference to it. And the next one is making sure subject state is self consistent before notification sends. That means it is important to make sure subject state is self consistent before calling notify, because observer query the subject for its current state in the course of updating their own state. So, these are the main 5 implementations which issues we can speak under this observer and pattern. And coming to the next template in our observer pattern is known uses. In this known uses, the first and the perhaps best example we can speak about this observer pattern is Smalltalk model view controller. In this, the user interface framework in the Smalltalk environment. And we can say some of the examples that we are using for this observer pattern is Smalltalk or ET++ programming language and think class libraries. These are the some of the known users we can say under this observer pattern. And the final one is related patterns. Coming to our related pattern to this observer patterns are mediator and singleton. Why we say these two patterns are related means whenever the mediator pattern, by encapsulating complex update semantics in the change management acts as mediator between subject and observer. Based on these, we say this is the mediator pattern which is related to an observer. And the next one is singleton. The change manager may use the singleton pattern to make it unique and globally accessible. So, based on this, we say singleton pattern is also related to an observer pattern. So, based on these conditions, we say this mediator pattern and singleton pattern will become as a related pattern to this observer pattern. So, this is about a pattern observer that which will come under a behavioral pattern.